And so you could have a beautiful lifestyle, um, and sort of live your dream life, maybe with a lower to mid six figure in revenue with a very lean team. um, or you could have multiple millions of dollars in revenue in your business and still have that beautiful lifestyle, but again have a very different kind of lifestyle. So just because we have a revenue number in our businesses doesn't necessarily mean that our take home pay is higher. It doesn't necessarily mean that our profit is higher. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Scalable Marketing Machine podcast. Today, we're talking about our painted picture, our vision for our lives and our business. And I love to ask this question to founders that I work with, which is, what game are you playing? So a lot of times when we're in the day-to-day to our business, we sometimes lose track of building intentionally the kind of businesses that we want to build, not someone else's vision. And I think that there's a lot of I think there's a lot of tension sometimes, especially for women, between this idea of building, a big business, right? Building a scalable business versus building a business that will suit your lifestyle. Okay. And so obviously we need to be building out businesses that suit our lifestyle, regardless of the size business that we want to have. But this is often a question that not a lot of folks ask themselves, which is, what game am I trying to play? And I think we get a little bit caught up in both ends of the spectrum of wanting maybe huge revenues. And we have this vision of getting to seven and multiple seven figures in our business. Um, or, we want to just kind of have something that's going to be just enough so we can, have the lifestyle that we want. And before we can really start consciously building a business to support either of those visions, it's really useful to actually sit down and strategize what is the type of life you're trying to build for yourself. And this is as simple as taking some time to set aside to journal and kind of reconnecting with that vision a couple times a year to make sure that it's still in line with what you want. And maybe as you start building your business and you start getting people on the team, you either could maybe get more excited for growing a bigger team, maybe surprise yourself and really like you really enjoy stepping into that leadership role. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you discover that, I don't really want to have employees. I don't want to be responsible for folks. And so you want to keep your team very lean. The other thing, and this is something that I talk a lot about, but I realize that it's not in everyone's vision. I think that there's, for many of us, kind of this symbolic $1 million mark in the business, right? And so we're striving to reach seven figures. It's like this elusive goal that many women that I speak to, and even myself, have that goal in mind, because I think we're fed this idea that, if you haven't reached, at least $1 million in revenue, somehow that number is very symbolic and like legitimizing a business, right? That it's a real business, because of course, real businesses that function in the world, $1 million in revenue is actually not that much, right? But for a small business, that could be quite significant. But what I want to dig into a little bit here is, $1 million, seven figures, or six figures, or five figures, right? I think the real point here is like, how do we define success? Because there's many businesses that I've worked with personally that are multiple $1 million, right? 3.5 to $5 million in revenue are the small businesses that I work with as a fractional CMO, like working inside their businesses with getting my hands dirty. And those businesses often, the margins, right, are much slimmer, right? The overall profit is lower because, of course, when you have a bigger team, when you're spending a lot of money in ads, for example, your profit is lower, right? And so you could have a beautiful lifestyle, um, and sort of live your dream life, maybe with a lower to mid six figure in revenue with a very lean team, um, or you could have multiple millions of dollars in revenue in your business and still have that beautiful lifestyle, but again have a very different kind of lifestyle. So just because we have a revenue number in our businesses doesn't necessarily mean that our take home pay is higher. It doesn't necessarily mean that our profit is higher. And so I love this exercise of kind of looking at what is a perfect day in your life look like. And I do this every couple months where I sit down and I write out, from the time I wake up, the time I put my head down at night, what are the things that I'm doing every single day? Like, what does my day, a typical day look like, right? What time do I wake up? What kinds of activities am I doing in my business, right? Am I running team meetings? Am I writing? Am I speaking at conferences? Am I whatever? There's so many different ways that you can imagine what your ideal day is. But going through that process is really eye opening because you can kind of write and map out your perfect day. And then you could take a beat and say, based on what my day looks like now, how close or how far away am I from what that vision is? And so when we look at like this question, this original question that I always ask all of the female founders inside my accelerator program, or my scalable marketing machine accelerator program. And if you want to know more about how to grow your business through marketing, you can go to Ugly Ventures, UGLIVNTURES.com/accelerator. You can learn all about it. But we meet each and every week in that accelerator program with the intention of sort of leveraging my experience and my knowledge to help keep, the founders I work with accountable and on track for building into this vision. And a lot of when we look at what game are we playing, right? A lot of that has to do with what types of marketing, how big is our marketing team? Because actually the marketing team and the folks that contribute to marketing for most businesses, most small businesses, most of the employees or the contractors, freelancers, they are in marketing, right? That department is the one that is the heaviest, I think, for many small businesses. And so when we kind of understand what game we're trying to play in terms of how much revenue are we trying to achieve by the end of the year, and then we work backwards with what types of marketing activities or what things do we need to do in order to reach those sales numbers in marketing, right? How many leads do we have to bring in the door? And then subsequently, what is the production of all of the marketing tactics that we're running in order to get all those leads that will then translate into sales? Now, I have to say, this wasn't instinctual for me to do. And it wasn't until I started working closely with larger businesses that had like CFOs, or just more involved accounting teams to really look at like what are the financial projections, what do we need to make up in revenue in order to have a profitable year. And that's such a critical, important process to go through. And it's part of this question. You, as a founder, setting what those revenue goals are going to be in line with how much do you want to pay yourself? How much profit do you have? How much does your operations cost, right? And you're going to configure that number. But I find that so many of us are not doing that. And by not doing that, we're sort of executing in a way that's very vague, right? We're not setting specific targets for all of the marketing activity that we're doing, or maybe even the sales activities that we're doing. And so we kind of end the year or end the month or quarter, or whatever, with whatever it is that we could kind of get done, as opposed to executing against like a very methodical strategy, which will give us specific targets that we need to work on, each and every week, things we need to reach each and every month in order to reach those revenue goals, right? But again, back to the original question, what game are you playing? right? So, in order to sort of understand what is you're aiming for, we need to be very clear on what is this vision, right? What does your workday look like? Do you work from an office space? Do you work from home, right? How many hours do you work? How big is your team? Um, how much money are you taking home each and every month, and how does that contribute maybe to your family's bigger vision of life, right? And so we need to work out those things because all of that is going to be part of our business revenue goals, right? So if we want to take home a certain pay as the founder, then we need to build in our revenue to support that. So whatever X amount of dollars you want your yearly take home to be from the business, we need to add that to the operational costs, right? Understand how many sales we need to make because oftentimes that number will also inform how much money we need to be spending on, let's say, team to execute specific tactics to reach a certain kind of metrics. Like social media manager needs to reach X amount of followers, or we need a email manager in order to make this many sales from emails, or we need to spend this much on ads in order to bring in these many sales from ads. So all of this works hand in hand. And it's not until you have taken that first step of knowing what it is that you want and dream of that you can actually put the plan together to get there. Right. And so as we're in the summertime, right? As we're kind of in a slow, maybe like during a slower pace right now. It's a holiday week when I'm recording this, but of course, summer for a lot of people are a slower time. But for me, I love to take the summer as a strategic time because I have more sort of mental clarity. There's not as many little meetings and little fires to put out over the summer. And so I spend a lot of time doing this exercise I'm explaining is this journaling, right? This vivid picture, this kind of painted picture of what you want your life to be. And give yourself like wings to dream, right? It doesn't mean that it has to happen in the next 3 months or the next 6 months, but you can begin to kind of stretch out that vision too, which is maybe you're functioning on like a quarterly vision or a yearly vision, but we can start saying, well, what do we want to achieve in 3 years? What do we want to achieve in 5 years? And if you look at those goals from a monetary standpoint, right, you have kind of that high level revenue number that you want, in year 3 or year 5. And then you put into that number, right, what you want your personal pay to be. And just as a sidebar, an interesting rule of thumb, and this comes from the book Profit First from Mike Michalowicz, which is if you're looking at your revenue goals as a business, owner pay could typically be about 50% of the revenue if you're functioning in a small business. So I'm saying you're one step above solopreneur, which is most of the female founders that I'm working with. This includes me, right? It's like I myself also have a very small team, right? I've got under 5 people working for me. And when we look at what our personal pay could be, if we say, all right, I'm going to aim for 50% of my take home pay to be it's 50% of my overall revenue. So then what does my overall revenue need to be year over year in order for me to kind of achieve that personal take home pay that's going to support this dream life, right? So start exploring with some of these questions. And another part of this exercise that I think is also very useful is, and I remember came from Tony Robbins. He said, when we look at our dream life and we really map it out and we really put some hard numbers to paper, oftentimes living the lives of like our wildest dreams is a lot less expensive than we think. And I doing this like personally now, I did this a couple of years ago. But I remember that number being a quarter of what I imagined it to be, right? Unless you're a person that wants to take private jets everywhere and like have a chauffeur, if you're sort of looking at, having a certain house and kind of calculating what your mortgage would be in your dream house in your dream neighborhood, right? Your dream car, what would your monthly pay on a dream car be, right? What kind of vacations do you want to take or what kind of travel do you want to do? put those numbers down. And often it's not millions of dollars that you need in personal income each year in order to achieve that. I think you'd be quite surprised. Often, when I've done this exercise with other founders and even with friends, it's usually maybe half of what they expected that it was. And so, again, a lot of times, if we're living in this state of wanting more for ourselves, but afraid to kind of do these exercises like mapping out your perfect day or really calculating what it would cost to have your dream life, you're really doing yourself a disservice because the first step in achieving all of that is to put the work into deciding what it is that you want and then understanding what it would take to get there. If we don't have like that even basic knowledge, of course we're never going to be getting anywhere. So that goes for our like personal lives, but it also goes for our business. What game are we playing, right? If we first need to understand what is the revenue that we're trying to achieve for the year. And there's so many founders that I talk to that don't even have that vision, like that number very clear in their minds. And so you're stuck in this mentality of like, we're just going to take whatever we're given instead of making a plan to reach a specific goal when it comes to revenue. And every other KPI in your business waterfalls backwards from that number. Because again, if you're trying to achieve $10 million in revenue, your business is going to look quite different than if you're trying to achieve $1 million in revenue. You're going to have way different costs, probably way different, team, different kind of consultants, maybe different kind of coaching, different kinds of investment in ads. It's going to vary vastly if you're trying to get to those two numbers in revenue. So having that idea of the game that you're trying to play, right? The life that you want, the vision of the business that you want, and the revenue that you're trying to achieve, and what that's going to do for your life. That's how you can architect like what actually your business looks like, right? Do you need 10 people on your team or do you need one? Your life is going to be quite different in those two scenarios. So the point of all this is just, as conscious as you can be in designing your life on a whole, I think the more satisfied and just happier you'll be in general. And I think that it may sound obvious, me saying this, but when we're kind of in it in our business in the day to day, I think we often have our heads down and we sometimes are just pushing forward and pushing the boulder up the hill. But what ends up happening sometimes is that you could be pushing in the wrong direction. And it's moments like this, like either listening to this now or just taking that time to journal, right? And just connect with what you really want is the way that you course correct. And you'll be surprised how often, at least for me personally, how often throughout a quarter, I'll catch myself working in the wrong direction because we have this desire for like action and progress or whatever. And sometimes that we may be so overwhelmed with that desire to like just get something done that maybe we look up from our work and we're like, what am I doing? This isn't really in line with what the big vision is and what the plan is, right? When different opportunities come up, for many of us entrepreneurs, we have this instinct to like say yes and seize all the opportunities. But this happened just this week with one of the founders inside of my accelerator program. She emailed me and she was like, we have this opportunity to be featured and this, that, and the other, like, what should I do or whatever. And that's why sometimes it's really great to have an outside perspective because her being in it and she just wants to see movement and action in her business, wanted to kind of sign a partnership deal and kind of take advantage of an opportunity that would cost her something. But when we pulled back and we looked at the bigger vision, the bigger strategy for the marketing that is in line with the vivid vision of where we want the business to go, taking that beat and pulling back, I could open up the conversation with her and say, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. And this opportunity here that you're sharing with me is not quite in line with where we want to go. And then it clicked with her, right? But that is such a great example of when you're alone, just working away in your house, right? Just like trying, your darndest to like make progress and go and go and go. And we all sometimes feel very impatient, right? Uh, we may slip away from that vivid vision, right? But again, just checking in with that. First of all, taking the time to do it in the first place, and then checking in with that um, at least once a quarter is works for me. So I would suggest doing it for yourself as well. And again, take the summer. Like the summer is can be such an enriching time. And when you have that downtime, because us as entrepreneurs and founders, we don't really ever shut off. So even when you're sitting on the beach and you're trying to disconnect and you're really trying hard not to look at your phone, redirect your thoughts to these questions. Where am I going with my business? What am I trying to build? What game am I playing? And then you could start to really create a conscious, intentional plan to get there and make sure anyone that's working with you in your business is also moving in that direction. So that's it for this week. I hope everyone had a beautiful 4th of July holiday, because I'm recording that at this time, and LinkedIn Live, although the podcast will be available much later than that. So sorry if that seems like a million years ago when you're listening to this on the podcast. But I so appreciate all of you out there listening, and hope you have a beautiful summer and that you take some of these things that I said to heart and realign with your vivid vision, because I know that you can get to any goal and you would accomplish any dream. But first, you need to be clear on what it is that you want. Okay, I'll catch you back here next week for the Scalable Marketing Machine podcast.